level has increased and imagination has evolved and knowledge has deepened. It's really glorious like that.
So let's see what else. So you've named off a bunch of these Smith. Have you ever collaborated with another Smith on a project? Or are there any Smiths you'd like to, you're dying to collaborate
Yeah,
with?
there are quite a few that I'd like to collaborate with. We have talked about doing stuff together, Owen Busch and I, and Peter Florianek and I, Zach Jonas. I mean, there is a number of people that I'd like to do something with. It's just that I'm terribly disorganized. And I tend to be buried in the project that I'm currently working with. So it's like, oh yes, we'll have to do that someday.
Well, what's one thing then that you would, if there's anybody here that is just starting out in this, what's one piece of advice that you would give them going forward?
Don't start out aiming to do this a full-time job. Don't sell yourself cheaply. Don't compete with production companies in pricing. That's really important. I've seen many gifted makers who has started out by trying to make a name through low prices. And 3 to 5 years later, they are broken in body or soul or both. And they skip it, they stop. And it's tragic. So because there are like big production companies who can make swords on the cheap, customers have an expectation that the sword, even expensive sword, shouldn't cost more than perhaps $1,000, perhaps $1,500. That's a really expensive sword. And if you think about hourly cost for an individual maker, you can do the maths and add on that the cost for a workshop, insurance, materials. It all adds up. And you simply cannot support yourself on a price level like that. It will kill you, or at least will kill you or your future as a maker. So the challenge is to relentlessly grow and learn and gain skills while keeping it sort of simmering on the side, while you have a job that can secure your rent and your food and keep you from going insane. And then once you can start to charge fully realistic prices, like $4,000 or $5,000 minimum for a sword, then you can start professionally do this. Before that, you're still a journeyman. Or you have to make swords that are made so quickly that you are forced to do compromises. Or it is a hobby, of course. And that's okay. But if you make yourself an identity as a hobby maker, it will be very difficult to take the step to become a full-time maker and really grow in the craft like you could. But this is really, really difficult, I think. However, we have many skilled makers plying the craft today. So people do find a way through this, of course. But that's I think, one of the biggest challenges. And to put yourself in a position where you can safely experiment and learn and develop your skills without having to start out doing compromises. I think that's the most important thing.
It's really, really good advice. I actually, it's really good advice for a lot of a lot of different professions, people trying to get into the profession, especially ones that are more craft and art.
Yeah, creative work that where you sort of, you're self-employed. I mean, you could look at any artist or artisan craftsman and see what kind of challenges are involved, and you can learn from that. It's very important also to network and build like a good connection with colleagues, because it can be lonely, it can be challenging to keep the spirits up sometimes.
So what's one project that you'd really like to work on that you haven't done yet, but it's just something that you're like, I would love to do this.
Well, there's so many.
It's hard to pick.
I would love to learn the craft and art of making bronze swords. I would love to explore the swords of the early Iron Age. I'm also looking forward to really getting started with the next exhibition project at Brett Holster's gallery, which will be a little bit different this time. But I'm really looking forward to it. We have sort of a roadmap laid out, and that will be great fun and another kind of challenge. So there's no shortage of things to dream about and to be looking forward to. The next museum visit is always something to be looking forward to, especially during this time of isolation and plague. But we must hope there is a world afterwards.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite museum? Is it local or international or?
Oh, again, there are many. I really appreciate the local collection of archaeological artifacts of Uppsala University, the museums in Stockholm, the Royal Armories and the Historical Museum are fantastic. The National Museum in Denmark, the Deutsches Klingen Museum, of course, the Royal Armories, the Wallace collection. Again, there are many who are really solid and extremely valuable collections.
So this is the last question I have written out for you, really, and it's something I'm asking all presenters that are coming out here, because this is a conference about swords, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be a difficult question for you. What is your favorite sword?
That's easy. It's the one that I'm currently working on.
Oh, nice. That's a great answer.
Mm.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. We're going to
Well,
open
thank you.
we're going to open up the panel, I guess, for if anybody has any questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see what people say. So if anybody has any questions for Peter, if you want to try either raising your hand, I don't know if you can raise your hand in this and I can unmute you, or how that works, if you just want to try unmuting yourself.
Can I try? Sorry.
Sorry, let's try Alex. Alex Hahn first.
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon, Matthew. Peter.
Hello there.
Hi. Just a
Hi,
question. Yes, I'm very happy to see you. Just a
Yes.
question. Today morning there was a discussion about sword and so to speak, sword for the profane, for those who are not noble, and so on. And
Oh, yeah.
I was under the impression that there is a misunderstanding, if I may, as a historian, especially in early medieval period. But I want you to elaborate on this and confirm or deny that in early medieval period, a sword was a status symbol par excellence. So no matter how skillful you were as a commoner, as how strong you were as a fighter, it was a privilege, and very restricted privilege, to carry a sword. It was not possible for anyone to appear on a battlefield with a sword if he was not entitled to a sword somehow. And this entitlement to sword was, in a way, you was granted a right to carry a sword, and that was a social status conferred upon you. It wasn't something which I found a sword, it was in a forest, I picked it up. Maybe in the heat of a battle it's possible, but not in the formal presentation as a warrior. You couldn't appear
Yes.
being of peasant rank, or being even of a craftsman. You were not entitled to carry a sword, and it was very much the same restricted to the horse riding. You remember? I mean, you remember the last battle we were on in 12th century?
Yes, exactly. No, this is an interesting question, and of course the answer will vary depending on geography and time period. However, I feel today that we perhaps we stress this nobility aspect of the sword a little bit too much. For example, in my part of the world, back in the day before it was even Sweden, but more local kingdoms, if you were a farmer, we didn't have much of a nobility, and the kings, they were elected more than elevated by inheritance. So anyone could really become king. Of course, it helped if you would belong to one of the big families, but it wasn't a given thing that the son of the king became the next king. So you had to be accepted by people at large, or at least a large group of influential families and clans. And at this time, which is really just a progression from the Viking Age, any person who owned land not only could have a sword, but must have a sword or an axe. And in the laws, it was stated the amount of land you farmed would qualify you for the duty to serve as yourself with armor, with axe and sword, with some kind of bow or crossbow, with spear or polearm, and you have to sort of respond to the call of the king for the defense of the local area. And this was the duty of every free member of society.
Precisely.
So the
sword was
the distinction goes between free men and serfs or slaves, of course. And in medieval Europe, in the cities, if you didn't own a sword and some kind of early black powder arm or crossbow, and you didn't show up at the city muster with proper weaponry, you weren't allowed to vote in who would be mayor or any other sort of city official. Journeymen and craftspeople were members of fencing clubs. So the owning of a sword was very much an expression of being a fully valued member of society, more than being part of the nobility. However, the nobility have always had a very special relationship to the sword. And there have been, of course, legal limits to the ownership and the wearing of swords. But that is more for keeping the city peace than for making a distinction between nobility and the people at large. Like the Roman legionnaire is very much a normal citizen. He is a citizen, a very much a typical citizen, but he is a citizen aside from everyone else. Becoming a citizen would be a way to be that was to be a legionnaire for a number of years. And the legionnaire carries a gladius or a spatha, but out of service, he cannot carry that sword because that's the sign of a serving military person. Privately, he can only carry the pugio. So this sort of the rules and the traditions around the sword will vary in different cultures and throughout history. But it's not such exclusive object that it's sometimes made out to be. Yeah, however, it still represents all of these very special and exclusive abilities like personal honor and truthfulness and all of that, which is connected very strongly to the nobility in society.
So we've got a lot of questions. This is fascinating. I'm learning stuff all the time, but we have a lot of questions. I like to sort of move along here because Anton Stark asked earlier in the chat when talking about your theory.
Oh, yes.
And he says he agrees in full with the theory, but he wants to know, how do we explain the exceptions? What underlying grammatical principles are there when a sword can't be explained using modules or regular ratios?
Well, I'll try to be short with this one. According to what I've seen in my studies, continental swords from the late 9th century and onwards tend to relate to geometric or modular principles. This is Central European and Anglo-Saxon swords. If you look at contemporary swords from Scandinavia, for example, they don't seem to follow the same holistic proportions, which means that the pommel and the point of the sword follows the same system that you can use for defining the proportion of blade width and hilt parts. However, the continental swords seem to do that. So from around the time of Charlemagne and onwards, there seems to be this rule established that now swords need to be made a certain way in Central European manufacture. And if swords don't conform to that, well, there are, of course, many reasons to it. They can be shortened, they can be re-hilted, they can be made by not fully professional craftsmen. There are many reasons why they wouldn't meet geometrical principles. However, it's striking that when you look at large, the continental European sword from around 800, 900, and up to the Renaissance, 8 out of 10 quite easily falls into a modular or geometrical layout. And to me, that is fairly striking and convincing.
This next question actually segues fairly nicely. It's from Javier Sole. It says, have you ever found an original sword that made you think, I have no clue how they made this, or you had problems trying to imagine how to reproduce it nowadays?
Often. That's one of the fun parts with this, that you have to try to figure things out. Absolutely. There can be small things, things that are technically difficult, or material treatments that are unknown to you. So, I mean, that's one of the constants in this line of work.
Juan Pedro Ficinati asks, what are things that we ignore regarding medieval and Renaissance swords making that you would like to know the most? I'm not sure, Ander.
Oh, well, that's difficult to reply to, but of course, it's always exciting when you start to grasp something that is a completely new aspect to the work. The greatest experience I've had so far was when I stumbled upon a system that can, for geometry, that can easily use to explain the proportions of swords, and not just one, but very many. And that was absolutely a game changer for me. And I'm not sure, I'm very sure this is not like the last thing that you can discover. There are many things like this. And the more we learn about how swords were made and how production was organized, and the economy around it, the social structure around it, the more we will understand the sort of the reasons behind design. It's very much more than just functional considerations. The sword is the result of a whole number of different reasons, and it's very easy to just reduce it to material or production or function and say we can explain the sword by those three sort of reasons, and that's not true. So the more we learn about context and sort of the culture around the sword, the more we'll understand both the craft and also the swordsmanship.
Let's see, does anybody else want to unmute or ask another question?
I typed mine out.
Oh, I see it there, Sean. Thank you. Sean asks, what books do you like to reference for inspiration, and do certain time periods tend to reach to you? Like he's drawn to the Latin or the early. He calls it Anglo-Saxon. And I know that we're taught now. They've changed the classification. Now it's just early England, early medieval English.
Yeah.
So.
Literature, there is an abundance of literature, of course, and I guess a literature list would be a good thing, but I'll have to sit down and write it, because it really depends on what you want to understand. There's a lot of work done on metallurgy that is crucial to understand. There is an enormous amount of archaeological reports that you can download as PDFs, and it's vast. There's so much you can grab hold of and study. So sorry, I really can't answer that question. I saw one person saying here, Anton Stark, to everyone,
Oh.
we must be very careful when speaking about medieval Europe as a whole. Yes, of course. I must say, I'm not a historian. And when I say medieval Europe, of course, that's not current with proper current sort of academic understanding of the historical period. It's a way to popular, to bring around a popular understanding of what we're talking about. But yes, of course, these are very complex and multifaceted things. And where do you draw the border between Europe and Asia and so forth? And why do you start a certain time period, a certain date? Yes, we can spend several hours discussing that. But I do take the shortcut of speaking of medieval Europe in the hope that you will listen to this with forgiving ears.
Tristan Tabor raised his hand here to ask a question.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could just speak to the sort of the dichotomy that exists within the like sort of utilitarian idea of a sword versus the artistic form. So whether that extends to its form itself, or also just the artistry that's put on it with engravings and etching and stuff like that.
Well, the interesting thing is that it's always both. It cannot be either or it's not a sword. So the fact that it is a symbol, that it carries meaning, either through decoration or lack of decoration, that's also meaningful. But it's never without meaning. It's never without significance. And that aspect of the sword is as important as its function as a weapon. And it couldn't uphold its powerful symbolical role if it wasn't for its function as a weapon. So both parts are equally important. So I hate that sort of people say, well, a sword is nothing but a sharpened bar of iron. I mean, a knight is nothing but human meat packed in sheet metal. I mean, if you really want to make things simplified, you completely miss the point. I mean, if you can't understand a thing by cutting away all the aspect that makes it an object that is alive in culture. You cannot study swordsmanship and hope to understand the sword without also trying to understand what the wearing of a sword meant in the period that you study. What does it mean for a person to wear a sword? Like Alex brought up, is it only the noblemen who are sort of allowed to wear a sword? If you have those spectacles on, the study of swordsmanship will take on a certain meaning. If you look upon the wearing of a sword as a way to say, no, I'm a fully, I'm a dedicated and valued member of society because I wear a sword. I wear a sword because I am that person. If you study swordsmanship from that perspective, it takes on yet another meaning. Or if you think about the sword as the thing that is given to you from your father and from his father before that, as a sign of tradition, of inheritance, of duties and privileges, yes, it's that also. The thing is with the sword is that it can mean so many things and often at the same time. But you cannot take away the fact that it's a functional weapon. Just like you cannot take away the cultural aspects of the sword and only look at it as a sharpened bar of steel and hope to get some kind of deeper understanding and higher reckoning.
Thank you.
So Craig Johnsson asks, What's the most recent sword artifact which has surprised you?
Hello, Craig. Great to see you, hear you. Oh, that was a good one. The most recent one. Online, there are all of these fantastic new finds. There's been a few Spanish swords that are just like illuminations, and I haven't seen the real ones until these finds, and it's delightful to actually see them. Some really early Iron Age swords have surprised me. I'm sorry, Craig, I'm letting you down. I wish I could have a nice, juicy example, but I feel I'm reaching for it. Again, there's so much going on. There's so many finds being made. Sorry to disappoint me there. Good question, though.
Von Morfet asks, would I be able to ask more about being a journeyman smith and surviving in the industry and having to work hard to not only keep a business running, but to improve yourself as a maker? Do you have any other advice? As I find it very hard and wearing on myself, both in body and mind.
Yes. Because traditionally, the learning to become a swordsmith was part of production. You started out as an apprentice, you elevated, you leveled up to be a journeyman, and maybe you spent your whole life being a journeyman. If there wasn't places enough for like a free space for a master in the town, then you became the assistant of the master. Maybe you were a more skilled swordsmith than the master, but you were still an employee of that master. Today, the manufacture of sword is rarely also including the trainee aspect of new coming swordsmiths. You have places like Arms and Armor, hi Craig, or Albion, where you have a staff of artisan makers who learn the craft of making swords. And those dedicated ones, they stay on and keep make swords. And they are truly the modern version of the medieval artisan, because they are doing their part of manufacture, and they make high quality work in a sort of a manufacturing setting. Otherwise, you have to strike out on your own, being a custom smith and doing everything on your own. And the trick is finding something to do that can sort of keep you alive as you grow as a maker. And it depends on your temperament and skills, I guess, what path forward you take. But I think it's essential that you give yourself time to grow, that you don't strike out to make a name or sort of try to establish yourself as a professional maker too early, because you will be forced to make compromises that can slow you down or even force you into a path that won't take you forward.
All right, I think that's a good place to end it today. We can set up for the next session.
Yeah, I see there. The hour went quickly.
It did.
Thank you, Matt. I hope this was worthwhile for you. I had great fun. Thank you for everyone who came here and listened and brought questions forward. That was great. Thank you all.
Great talk. And I thank you for taking your time to do this for me. And I thank everybody for tuning in. We're going to take a brief, like 5-minute break. I'm going to put everybody back out in the waiting room. And then we're going to set up for Nicholas Cocciolo. He's doing the next talk. So Peter, you're welcome to stay logged in if you want to watch too. I'm not sure what time it is for you over there. So
I'll stay around.
All right, I'm gonna put everybody back out except for Nick. I'm gonna put you all back out in the waiting room for a little bit, and then I'll bring everybody back in. Great, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.